website that delivered pet food went public and raised $82 million. It had no profit, no real plan, just a sock puppet mascot and a Super Bowl ad.
6 months later, it was gone, and it took $5 trillion with it. This is the story of how America fell in love with the internet, handed it a blank check, and watched it burn everything down. And the wildest part, we never saw it coming, because we were too busy getting rich. Palo Alto, California, 1993. A 22-year-old student named Mark Andreessen was sitting in a computer lab at the University of Illinois. Outside, people were still using fax machines. Inside, he was building something that would rewrite civilization. He called it Mosaic, the world's first graphical web browser. Suddenly, the internet wasn't just for government researchers and tech nerds typing in green code. It had pictures, it had color, it had pages you could actually click on. For the first time in history, the internet looked like something a normal person could use. Nobody understood what that meant yet, but a few people had a feeling. By 1994, Andreessen had moved to Silicon Valley and co-founded Netscape, the browser that would bring the internet to the masses. When Netscape went public in August 1995, it had never turned a profit. Not once. It didn't matter. On the first day of trading, shares opened at $28 and shot to $75 before lunch. By close, the company was worth $2.9 billion. A company with no earnings, worth nearly $3 billion. In a single afternoon. Wall Street leaned forward. Something was happening, and just like that, the gold rush began. Cue the music. It's 1996. The internet is no longer a curiosity. It's a religion. Every newspaper, every magazine, every dinner table conversation is about the same thing. The web, the future, the money. Venture capitalists are throwing cash at anyone with a domain name and a dream. You want funding? Easy. You need a business plan. No, you don't. You need a .com. Slap it on the end of your company name and watch the zeros multiply. The logic was simple and completely insane. The internet is going to change everything. Therefore, every internet company is worth a fortune. Therefore, you have to invest now before it's too late. Therefore, it doesn't matter if they make money, because someday they will make all the money. Therefore, just buy. Just buy. Don't ask questions, just buy. Entrepreneurs who had never run a business in their lives were raising tens of millions of dollars over lunch. College dropouts pitched to rooms full of men in suits who nodded along and wrote checks they didn't fully understand. Business models were optional. Profitability was for old people. Growth was the only metric that mattered. Not real growth. Projected growth. Imaginary growth. The kind of growth you drew on a whiteboard with a marker and called a strategy. The pitch was always the same. We're going to capture X% of a Y billion-dollar market. The math rarely added up. Nobody checked. Meanwhile, on Wall Street, something strange was happening to the numbers. The Nasdaq, the stock exchange where most tech companies lived, began climbing. And climbing. And climbing. In 1995, it sat around 1,000 points. By 1999, it had crossed 3,000. By early 2000, it would nearly touch 5,100. A 400% increase in 5 years. Every dip was bought. Every correction was temporary. Every analyst had a price target higher than the last. The market wasn't reflecting reality anymore. It was manufacturing it. And the money wasn't just coming from Wall Street. Regular people were in. Taxi drivers, teachers, retirees. People who had never bought a stock in their lives were opening online brokerage accounts and going all in on tech. Day trading became a national sport. You could quit your job, sit at home in your pajamas, buy and sell internet stocks all day, and make more money than you ever had at work. People did exactly that. By the millions. It felt like the rules had changed. Like this time was different. Like the old laws of economics, profit, revenue, sustainability, didn't apply anymore. We were in a new era, the information economy. And in the information economy, ideas were worth more than factories. Eyeballs were worth more than earnings. And if you weren't investing, you were being left behind. Even Alan Greenspan, the chairman of the Federal Reserve, stood before Congress and warned about irrational exuberance. That was 1996. The Nasdaq promptly ignored him and kept going up for 4 more years. Now let's talk about the companies. Because the companies are where it gets beautiful, and horrifying, and beautiful again because of how horrifying it is. Pets.com. You already know about the sock puppet. But here's the full picture. Pets.com launched in 1998 with the idea of selling pet food and supplies online. Perfectly reasonable. The problem? They were selling products below cost. A bag of dog food that cost them $45 to ship would sell for $30 on the site. They were paying customers to buy from them and calling it market share acquisition. They raised $82 million in their IPO in February 2000. By November 2000, the company was dead. 9 months. That's how long $82 million lasted when your entire model was built on losing money faster than anyone else. But Pets.com wasn't alone. It wasn't even unusual. Webvan promised same-day grocery delivery. They raised over $375 million, built massive automated warehouses across the country, hired thousands of drivers, and burned through every dollar before shutting down in 2001 after 18 months of operation. Cosmo.com would deliver you a single candy bar to your door within an hour, for the same price as buying it at a store. No delivery fee. They raised $280 million. They shut down without ever turning a profit. Boo.com, a British fashion startup, burned through $135 million in 6 months, trying to create an interactive 3D shopping experience that most internet connections in 1999 were too slow to actually load. Their website required a computer more powerful than most people owned. Their target customer literally could not use their product. They launched anyway. They collapsed anyway. They raised another round anyway, then collapsed again. These weren't failures of ambition. They were failures of basic arithmetic. But basic arithmetic wasn't fashionable anymore. The real fuel for all of this wasn't just greed. It was fear. The fear of missing out. The fear that if you didn't invest now, you would be left behind in the new economy. That your neighbor would be a millionaire and you'd still be driving a 1991 Honda Civic. That history was being made and you weren't in the room. That fear was more powerful than any business plan. More powerful than any earnings report. More powerful than common sense, and the media made it worse. CNBC ran stock tickers 24 hours a day. Magazine covers celebrated CEOs in their 30s like rock stars. Wired magazine published cover story after cover story about the coming revolution. The message was constant and intoxicating. This is new. This is different. This is the future. Get in or get out of the way. Companies understood this. They didn't need to make money. They needed to make noise. And the louder you were, the more you raised. So they advertised massively, recklessly. 17 dot-com companies bought Super Bowl ads in January 2000. 17. The Super Bowl. The most expensive advertising real estate on the planet. Companies that had never made $1 of profit spent millions on 30-second commercials to tell America they existed. It worked for about 8 weeks. Because by March 2000, something shifted. Nobody agrees on exactly what triggered it. Maybe it was a Barron's cover story in March that calculated how quickly dot-com companies were burning through cash. Maybe it was Japan's economy slumping and foreign money pulling back. Maybe it was the Federal Reserve raising interest rates 6 times between 1999 and 2000, making borrowing more expensive and suddenly making profits matter again. Maybe it was just gravity. What goes up that fast, with nothing holding it up, eventually falls. On March 10th, 2000, the Nasdaq hit its peak, 5,048 points, the highest it had ever been, the highest it would be for another 15 years. And then, quietly, almost politely, it began to fall. At first, nobody panicked. Dips happened, corrections were healthy. Buy the dip, stay the course. The fundamentals are strong, except the fundamentals were never strong. There were no fundamentals. There were projections and promises and pitch decks full of hockey stick graphs that assumed infinite growth in a finite world. By April 2000, the Nasdaq had dropped 34% from its peak. In 1 month. 34%. $1 trillion in market value, gone. Analysts who had been cheerleaders for years suddenly found their voices, revised their price targets downward, downgraded their ratings, quietly deleted their most optimistic reports. The mood changed overnight, not gradually, overnight. The same investors who had thrown money at anything with a .com in the name now wanted nothing to do with any of it. The same journalists who had celebrated the revolution now wrote about its victims. The music stopped, and everyone looked around for a chair and realized there weren't enough. Companies began running out of cash, and when .com companies ran out of cash, they didn't slowly fade. They collapsed, suddenly, completely. Because most of them had no revenue to fall back on, no physical assets to sell, no plan B. They had raised money, raised more money, spent more, and assumed the next round would always come. Now the next round wasn't coming, ever. Layoffs happened in waves, hundreds at a time. Then thousands. Young programmers who had been lured to startups with stock options and ping-pong tables and promises of life-changing wealth suddenly found themselves unemployed with worthless equity and no savings because they had invested everything in the company they worked for. The office perks disappeared overnight. The free lunches, the foosball tables, the company retreats. Gone. Just empty desks and cardboard boxes and the specific silence of an office that knows it's dying. Between 2000 and 2002, over 900 dot-com companies shut down or went bankrupt. Not 9, not 90. 900. Investors lost approximately $5 trillion in market value. That's 5 with 12 zeros. Gone. Not transferred to someone else. Just gone. Evaporated. The wealth was never real. It was a reflection in a funhouse mirror that everyone had agreed to call reality. The human damage was quieter than the market charts suggested. Engineers in their late 20s with resumes full of failed startups struggled to find work in a market that had turned cold on tech overnight. Families who had put retirement savings into Nasdaq index funds watched years of security disappear in months. Cities that had been booming on tech money, San Francisco, Seattle, Austin, suddenly had empty office buildings and unemployed workers and restaurants closing because nobody could afford lunch anymore. And the companies that survived? They survived ugly. Amazon, which had been celebrated and mocked in equal measure, watched its stock fall from $107 in 1999 to $7 in 2001. 93%. Jeff Bezos appeared on magazine covers for a different reason now. Survivor. Not winner. Not yet. The company nearly went bankrupt. They cut staff. They cut costs. They focused, for the first time with genuine urgency, on actually making money. That discipline, forced on them by collapse, would eventually make Bezos the richest person on Earth. But in 2001, nobody was saying that. In 2001, Amazon was a cautionary tale. Google had gone public. Apple was still almost irrelevant. Facebook didn't exist yet. The internet itself wasn't going anywhere. The technology was real. The connectivity was real. The transformation of commerce and communication and culture was real. But the valuations weren't. The promises weren't. The business models weren't. And the market had finally, brutally corrected the difference between what was real and what was imagined. By 2002, the Nasdaq sat at 1,114 points, down 78% from its peak. Back to where it started before the mania began. As if the whole thing had never happened. Except it had. And $5 trillion worth of people felt every single dollar of it. What did we learn? That's the question every collapse leaves behind. And the honest answer, looking at what came next, at the housing bubble, at the crypto booms, at the AI frenzy, is that we didn't learn as much as we should have. The pattern is seductive because it's always slightly different. Different asset. Different technology. Different story. Same psychology. Same fear of missing out. Same suspension of disbelief. Same moment when the music stops and everyone realizes they were dancing on air. The dot-com crash wasn't a failure of the internet. The internet won. It just didn't win on the timeline or in the form that the market demanded in 1999. The companies that survived were the ones that quietly, unglamorously, figured out how to make more money than they spent. Revolutionary concept. The ones that failed weren't stupid. Some of them were brilliant. They were just early. Or wrong about the timing. Or wrong about the customer. Or just wrong in the way that most new things are wrong before the right version comes along. Pets.com's sock puppet got auctioned off after the company died. Someone bought it for $125. That's what $82 million and a Super Bowl ad bought in the end. A sock puppet worth $125. And maybe that's the most honest valuation the whole era ever produced. Because when you strip away the pitch decks and the magazine covers and the CNBC ticker and the fear and the greed and the belief that this time was different, what you're left with is pretty simple. A company is worth what it can earn, not what it might earn, not what it projects, not what it promises, what it can actually, verifiably, provably earn. That's it. That's the whole lesson. $5 trillion to learn something that accountants knew in 1920. But don't worry, we'll probably have to learn it again.